This morning's sermon, Christian Witness in the Shadows of Empire. It's the first sermons in my new series for August on the book of Revelation. And I know what some of you may be thinking. Really? The book of Revelation? Of all the books in the Bible, why spend 4 weeks with a book that's filled with dragons, beasts, mysterious numbers, cosmic battles, and strange visions? What does any of that have to do with raising children, paying bills, navigating political division, serving our sisters and brothers in need, or simply trying to follow Jesus in the world? Maybe you're wondering, I've seen something in the headlines that has convinced me that the end is finally near. Maybe this is going to be the sermon series where we identify the Antichrist, calculate the date of Christ's return, or match every news story to another prophecy. Some of us grew up with Schofield study Bibles or Clarence Larkin's prophecy charts and long discussions about what is the mark of the beast. I understand the apprehension when hearing you're preaching from the book of Revelation, because I grew up hearing many of those interpretations. But Revelation wasn't written as a secret code about the 21st century. It was written to ordinary churches living through extraordinary times. Its author, John, wrote from exile after suffering because of his witness to Jesus Christ. His readers were Christians trying to remain faithful in a complicated and often hostile world. Their world was different from ours, but their questions were not. And that is why Revelation may be more relevant than we have imagined. And so I want to begin our series with 2 questions. What if Revelation was never primarily written to satisfy our curiosity about the future? What if it was written to strengthen our courage in the present? What a powerful and impressive text that I've just read in your hearing. In the very first words, the book of Revelation, we encounter something that is so often overlooked. And it is simply this: the revelation of Jesus Christ. You see, that may seem obvious, but it is profoundly important. Before Revelation reveals anything about beasts and Babylon and plagues or the end of history, it wants to reveal Jesus. The focus of the book is the revelation of Jesus Christ, the risen Lord. And it is so compelling, the vision that John receives, seeing Christ in a way not defined by their historical memory. You will recall when Jesus came to earth, he was born in poverty. We love the story of Jesus being born in a manger. He grew up in Nazareth. He's not a person of significant means. In his early 30s, he rose to notoriety and had an incredible teaching and healing ministry. And over time, he was perceived to be a threat to the political and the religious establishment. He was betrayed. He was arrested. He was executed. But on the 3rd day, God raised him from the dead. John doesn't see Christ as the one who has suffered in human history. He sees Christ in his exalted state, which is so very important as we begin this journey We begin this journey by fixing our eyes upon Jesus. Because if you're going to understand the powers at work in the world, we must first see Christ rightly. And that's what Revelation chapter 1 is encouraging us to do, is to have this vision of Christ that helps us to make sense of the complexities and the difficulties that the church then and now face. Because if the truth be told, this vision of Christ, a church that has its eyes and its gaze set upon the risen Christ, that is the very thing the empire wants to take away from you. The empire doesn't want you to see the risen Christ. The empire doesn't want you to see Christ, who has been exalted above what the powers of the world try to do to them. They want you to have a substitute Christ. Some of the very same themes we talked about during our weeks and days leading up to Easter. Revelation begins, no, not with the future. It begins with this incredible, profound vision of Christ in the here and the now. The opening chapter also reminds us that this book was written in a particular moment in history. That if you're going to understand the import of Revelation, and I do want to encourage you to come to our first Bible study on the 12th, because not only will you get some good chicken, but we're going to also dig deep into this book. John tells us that he received this vision while he was in exile on the island of Patmos. He says, because of the word of the Lord and the testimony of Jesus Christ. Patmos was not a vacation destination, it was a penal colony. He found himself as a political exile. He had been banished to this island. Just because the empire banishes you and sends you away does not mean you are beyond the gaze of God. God knew where he was. God sent an angel to him in exile to give him this vision and to tell him to write these things down. Because John, you are a product of 7 churches and you all are facing these challenges together. And I want you to write these things and send these things to the church. I love that John is the one who is writing this, someone who is paying the price, someone who's in prison because he has been doing the work. I love that John, coming from a marginalized position, is being given a vision that's not only going to inspire these 7 churches, but it's going to inspire the church for succeeding generations, so much so that this writing finds itself as the last writing in our canon. But it's also important to not just pay attention to John, but to think about these churches, these 7 churches living in the shadow of the Roman Empire, the greatest political, military, and economic power of its day. Rome promised peace and prosperity and security and order, but it maintained it through conquest, violence, economic exploitation, and the demand of unquestioned loyalty. Rome does what it wants to because it has the power to do it. It bends and yields to no one, crushes many, and the church finds themselves living in the shadows of this empire that John will later describe as a beast. I love how African and African American theologians lift up the importance of this text, not for its futuristic implications, but that the book of Revelation is a piece of what we call apocalyptic writing, a particular genre from the ancient world that tries to give meaning to suffering communities by helping them to understand the relationship between their particular historical moment and the canvas of human history and this grand work that God is up to. A writing like Revelation is born out of suffering. God's people are experiencing persecution, suffering. And so Alan Bozak describes Revelation as a book that has the twin themes of comfort and protest. Comfort to those who are suffering, but then also calling the church to stand up and to protest. Dr. Blunt describes this book as one that gives attention to the intricate relationship between politics and religion. You're going to learn that in the province of Rome, that you not only must respect Rome, you must literally worship it. You must bow the knee. That when first century Christians were saying Jesus is Lord, it was not a spiritual, religious statement. It was a political statement that was saying Jesus is Lord, not Caesar. Because in the first century, that was the language of the empire, that you must recognize the divine right of the empire to do what it does, and the person who sits on the throne as the emperor often brandish themselves as a deity. We'll learn about the worship of the emperor that the churches were grappling with and struggling with. But I do want to flag that simple statement when these first century Christians were saying Jesus is Lord. That's a political statement. That has almost been robbed from our discourse as Christians. When people say Jesus is Lord today, they have no idea what that really means. They think they can worship Jesus as Lord and also the empire. But you can't. And that brings me to one of the central questions, not only of Revelation, but this entire sermon series. And the question is this: who deserves our ultimate loyalty? And that's what the book of Revelation is about. Every generation has to answer that question. Whether it's the churches that were in Pergamum, Thyatira, that were involved in the worship of the emperor, or whether it's those of us who are living in the shadows of the American empire, grappling with this movement we describe as white Christian nationalism. The question of who deserves our ultimate loyalty is the issue the book of Revelation will make painstakingly clear. And it's just so striking to me. So striking that the first vision John receives is not of the beast, it's of Christ. Because that's going to be the thing the empire is going to test. The empire is going to test your allegiance to Christ. The empire is going to test if Jesus is really Lord. The empire is going to want to see if you are willing to barter your faith in your relationship with Christ in exchange with the goods and the accoutrements of the empire. By the time we end this series, you're going to have to grapple with some of the same questions John is going to pose to his readers, which is why we come back to this vision of Christ. What does John see? He sees Christ walking amongst the lampstands, which represents the churches. Christ stands among his people. He knows their struggles. when he addresses each church, the first thing he's going to say is that I know your works. You know why Christ knows our works? Because Christ walks among us. He's here this morning. The little dialogues and conversations you're having in your head, he hears them. He sees what we do when we are together and when we go our separate ways. Oh, he knows us. He knows what we struggle with, but he wants us to know that he is the one that we answer to, not who's in Washington, not who's in Frankfurt. No, we are ultimately accountable to Jesus. It is Christ who holds history in his hands, and it is Christ that we must first reckon with. Because when we have this compelling vision of Christ, it gives us what we need to be a people of faith in the shadows of empire. So let me conclude. Let me give you 3 reasons I believe the book of Revelation is relevant for the church in America. Number 1, Revelation calls us to examine our ultimate loyalty. John's first readers lived in the shadow of Rome, and so do we. We live in the shadow of a neo-Rome. We call it America. And Revelation asks every generation the same question: who or what ultimately shapes our identity, our values, our decisions? Revelation wants us to answer by saying our allegiance is first to Christ, which takes me to the second point of relevance. Revelation will challenge our social, commercial, and religious entanglements. New Testament scholar David Carey observes that the book of Revelation, more than any book in the New Testament, presses Christians to examine how our social and commercial entanglements may compromise our loyalty to Christ. You see, it's one thing to give lip service and say, "Oh, Jesus, you're first." But it's another thing to see the ways in which your very life is entangled and caught up in the machinations of a corrupt empire. That you are a part of the violence. That you are a part of the exploitation. The book of Revelation is a book that's not going to let you off the hook too easily. It's going to be a book that says, wait a minute, did Jesus really mean if I'm going to follow him, I must give up something? I must deny myself, take up an instrument of death, sacrifice something, and follow? I thought being a Christian just meant going to church and getting the key to the city. And every day being, as old Joel Osteen says, a happy day. But that maybe following Jesus is going to cost you something. And this is why Christian witness today is falling on hard times, because the gospel is challenging us. Are we going to hold to God, or are we going to hold to our stuff? And you know what some of you are saying? Well, can I have both? And the third challenge is that Revelation gives courage to churches seeking to bear faithful witness in the shadows of empire. I can't wait to preach next week to juxtapose Ephesus with Smyrna. See an example of a faithful church that's doing good things, but it's lost its way. It's going through the motions, but the love, the passion, the zeal, the why is gone. Smyrna is suffering, and Jesus just tells them to continue to be faithful. This book reminds us of the absolute importance of having courage today. Courage in the face of the reality that Things don't always get instantly better. Sometimes they're going to remain just like they are. But it doesn't mean that gets the final word. No, only God does. You see, Revelation isn't about all the speculation about the end. It was written to strengthen Christians facing extraordinary pressures. It begins them on the journey by seeing that Christ is Lord, that Christ is walking amongst his churches, and Christ is calling his people to faithfulness. So I want to encourage you, my sisters and my brothers, to do something you probably haven't done in years. And I'm not exaggerating it. I encourage you to read the book of Revelation. To read the book of Revelation through the lens of what you have heard this morning. And if you want an additional resource, do not hesitate to pull me to the side and say, Pastor, what can I do to learn more about this book? Before I take my seat, I'm going to ask you all I'm going to give you a prayer request for your pastor. Pray for me because I told God the last book I wrote was my last book. That I was done writing books, and for some reason God is pushing me about this book that I need to write on the book of Revelation. So pray for me that maybe God will give this assignment to someone else. Because I am convinced the challenges we are facing in this country sound eerily similar to the challenges they were facing. The ways in which the masses were bowing the knee to the beast looks eerily similar to the many knees bowed to this empire. I invite you to join me on this sermonic journey. Thank you.